what you told me.
I wasn't going to come in today, but I had to then. When I heard you speak, you really did inspire me. And I just wanted to really say how much I welcome this report. It was just so joyful, actually, to have read it, to have looked at the recommendations. For me, this report lays bare in unbelievably brilliant detail what Palestinians have said for decades, that they're living under a system of apartheid. Now, no doubt about it. And we know that B'Tselem have said the same thing, and others. B'Tselem is Israel's biggest human rights organisation. And we here in Ireland, you know, we've stood for human rights and played such an important role in opposing apartheid in South Africa in the 80s. I believe Ireland has an obligation to act on this now. I genuinely believe Ireland has an obligation, that we must act. And I've been to recently, 2018, I was in the West Bank and I was in Gaza. I don't know how I got in, but I got in. And I can't tell you the impact that had on me. It left a mark on me that I will never forget. I mean, I saw the apartheid, the blatant apartheid with my own eyes. I went to Hebron, where I saw how the Palestinian people were moved out of their own homes, their own businesses, moved up into the mountains, and they were not allowed to walk down their own streets. Can you imagine what that would have been? Imagine if that happened here in Dublin, Grafton Street. People were just moved out of where they lived, apartments or businesses, taken out, moved out somewhere, and then not allowed to walk up to even look, you know, to look at where they used to live. This is in the West Bank. This is in what's called the so-called two-state solution. I drove, you know, through the settlements. It was like driving. It was like being in Florida. People have this image of the settlements being little, you know, maybe little huts or something. But it was like driving through Florida. There was palm trees, there was shopping centres, there was big fountains, there was swimming pools, right? And, you know, then you drive around the corner where people have no water. You know, their electricity is being cut off. They're living in absolute deprivation and poverty. And, you know, people can't even drive down their own roads. You know, if they have a certain licence plate, they're not allowed to drive, you know, on the main roads. They have to drive around. Kids in Hebron had to walk, instead of going like 200 metres from where they lived to their school, they had to walk like 2 miles or whatever it is, all the way around. Because soldiers were there. We were allowed to go down those streets because we were with an Israeli citizen who was an ex-Israeli soldier from Breaking the Silence, who, by the way, told us on that trip that when he was an Israeli soldier, what he had to do when he went on duty at 12 o'clock at night to 8 o'clock in the morning, he was told to make their presence felt. I said, what do you mean make your presence felt? He said, we had to go into homes in the middle of the night and terrorise those people so as that all the neighbours could hear them, you know, so as that was making their presence felt. And sometimes they would really, you know, maybe insult the women and get the men going. And then they would do that from 12 o'clock to 8 o'clock in the morning. And the chances are that's going to happen tonight, or we're all asleep in our beds. So that's the reality. That's what I saw. And, you know, so this, I can't tell you what this means. When we started to, you know, campaign for the Occupied Territories Bill, which, by the way, like, is, you know, to me, this is about international law. International law, you know, the ICJ are saying these settlements are illegal, they're breaking international law, we're trying to do something that's not major by any means, just not receiving goods from the settlements. That's all we're trying to do, to make a point that we don't want to focus. We actually, by receiving these goods, we in Ireland are breaking international law. So when I was on a campaign to bring in this bill, and I went around the country and I held public meetings, and let me tell you something, those public meetings, the people were hanging out of the rafters. There was people turned away from those public meetings, actually, in this country, in Ireland, because we know what it must be like for the Palestinian people. So what I'm saying here today is I cannot tell you what this means, this report. To the Irish people, I might add. This report, like, I can't thank you enough for it. At last, we have an organisation like Amnesty saying this is apartheid. It was the same back in the 80s. The Irish government back then wouldn't support legislation back then, and it was the people who changed. And it was people in Ireland here who changed the whole course of what happened in South Africa back in the 80s. And I believe the people might do the same again, because I intend to hold meetings again in this country with this report to say this is apartheid. And that's what I would like to see happen in this country. And it's not just about the government and what they're saying. This is about what the people are saying. So the only question I have, and really it's to yourself, Salah, and it really is, firstly, there's two questions I have for you. One is about the Occupied Territories Bill. What would it mean to the Palestinian people to have the Occupied Territories Bill passed here in this country? And by the way, I've been actually invited to many different countries around in Europe and Chile. I was invited to Chile and other countries I haven't got around to visiting them all, to go and talk about the Occupied Territories Bill because they want to introduce it themselves. What would it mean, firstly? And what was it like? Because I remember when we couldn't get the Occupied Territories Bill in the programme for government, because when we brought it in the last term, you know, we had all opposition parties, Fianna Fáil included, and the Green Party, who supported us. And then when it came in for programme for government, when it was being discussed for programme for government, it was taken off the programme, which was devastating. What was that like for the Palestinian people? Would you be aware of what that was like? Because I know that I got hundreds of emails from the Palestinians saying, what's going on? We thought Ireland was going to help us. We thought Ireland was going to stand up for what was right and stand up for us. The Palestinian people are looking to Ireland to help them, you know, and that's why this report is so important. And okay. I can't thank you enough.
Thank you, Senator Black. I would remind Mr O'Gorman and Mr Higazi in particular, to whom the question was addressed, you know, the matter of the piece of legislation that was referred to. You know, I really don't believe it was as simplistic as suggested by Senator Black.
All the lies that you told me.